Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to see you all here, so many people. I imagine this is also a refuge from the heat. I hope that we will respond to your expectations at least, and I hope that we draw your attention. Thank you for being here. This is the second encounter of a cycle organized by Photoespaña. I'm María Santoyo. I am the director of the festival, and thanks to the collaboration with Fundación Telefónica, from the beginning of the festival, a long collaboration, and also I have collaborated with this organization for many years. So first of all, I would like to thank them for their support. This session is called Future Image. We're going to be exploring new formats, giving voice to those that are exploring new territories such as AI. We will be focusing on AI today, but we're not only going to talk about AI during this cycle. We're going to talk about the interaction between art, creativity, visual arts, and the employment of these new tools, some of them more known, others in experimentation, but those tools that on the one hand can concern us. They imply certain issues, ethical, legal issues, or even related to negative aspects of globalization, depending on who uses them, and take into account that fear can be fought with love and with knowledge. It was important for us to be able to give the voice to protagonists who know these tools. During the last edition of the cycle, we will be talking about legal and ethical aspects, but we started out the cycle in June with an encounter focused on different artists, different people who work with digital arts. We had Meunier with us, with Cristobal Ascencio from Mexico, and Philip Kustik, the youngest of the three. The three were presented during the framework of the festival. I encourage you to look at that session. It is on the website of Fundación Telefónica, and we have 3 expos of exhibitions of these 3 artists are available. For example, Meunier at the French Institute. Today we will be focusing on AI. We have exceptional artists. Today we will have a first session devoted to entangled others, comprised by Sofia Crespo and Feileacan McCormick, and then we will have Mercedes Hausmann and Jorge Salgado. I don't want to reveal any secrets, but I'm sure that they will surprise us with their art and their production. Thank you once again to this organization, to Fundación. Thank you to the interpreters, the technicians, the photographers, the technical support, always excellent. And let's start. So I would like to invite Fili to come up to the stage first. Welcome.
Bien, so nice to meet you. Bueno, Feli, por presentar.
Just to introduce him briefly, his CV, he is part of, together with Sofia Crespo, of the art study called Entangled Others. It was founded in 2020. They work in the collaboration with multidisciplinary arts, research and exploration of AI. They are part of Photoespaña with a very special project that we will be presenting here today. It will be presented at the Museum of Altamira on September the 13th, so it hasn't been open yet. He focuses on the exploration of IT systems and how they can be employed in research and the comprehension of the natural world. He's interested by computing, complex technologies, and also an interest as a naturalist or romantic artist, surprised by the environment and how these two spheres can collaborate in his art. He has digital native works. He also works with digital physical hybrids and works with sculpture, installations and engravement. He's collaborated with different institutions such as the V&A, MIT. He is Norwegian. He lives in Lisbon. He says he's not going to have any holidays. He's been working on many projects since February. This means that the studio is going well. You will see some examples now. But I understand that this is an intense moment of work. Thank you for coming to Madrid. Thank you for collaborating in Photoespaña, Sofia and yourself, with the piece for Altamira. He will give us context on his art, but just to ask a first question, precisely how this research of natural world, the fauna, the flora, in the case of Sofia, for instance, but now as artistic collaborators, has been a common matrix to the two of you, and also taking into account the latest technologies and mix them with this curiosity, amazement towards nature. So with this, I will give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you all for having us here. The context of our work and the reason for us using technology very much relates to actually the microscope. As many of you may be familiar with, it's a piece of technology that brought us very much closer to the world, in fact, because a lot of the modern way that we think and talk about technology is one that is somehow distancing for us from the natural world. And the reality is that it's how we use these technologies, how we take any specific type of technology and how we implement that in the world. And that has been very interesting to us because the tools we have available to us can help shape the world around us and help shape our understanding. Now, if you take a look at this image here, you're probably wondering why I'm showing you these medieval drawings. Now, these are medieval drawings made by illustrators in the Middle Ages who were trying to depict animals that had been described to them by explorers. So, as you can see here, the beaver might be sort of vaguely familiar. The hippopotamus, on the other hand, is rather weird, and it just gets weirder from there. The thing about these creatures is they are all based upon what the illustrator knew. So their experiences, their references were the limits of their imagination. And this is actually really relevant when we talk about artificial intelligence, or as we prefer to call it, neural networks. Now, what are they? I mean, everybody's heard of AI, right? But AI is basically, or a neural network, is an algorithm that allows us to take large quantities of data, for example, millions of images, and to extract and learn patterns from these images, distilling down the visual essence and allowing us to generate images that represent the essence of that. But at the same time, these neural networks can only represent or create outputs based upon what they were trained on. And I'd like to start by sharing this work here by my collaborator, Sofia Crespo, this is from a series called Artificial Natural History, where she explored natural history archives of these early explorations from the 1900s, and how through distilling these down, you start to really see these interesting patterns of representation, but not only that, but the patterns of how these creatures were, in a sense, presented. So there was this guiding idea that we focus on a single specimen, very much divorced from the context of their ecosystem, started to really prevail in this context. And this assemblage of what they considered to be related specimens emerged. So there was this strong shaping of the world to come now, and we now in our modern times think ever more granularly. We're ever more focused on defining individual small parts of the world. And this is very interesting because this is something we take for granted, but through using technology, we were better able to actually see just how, because this here, for example, this is us diving in Ushuaia earlier this year. And diving is a fantastic example of another technology that brings us closer to a world we physically cannot inhabit. And in the same way, through using neural networks, we're able to better connect and understand with patterns in what we might take for granted or not see so clearly otherwise.
Precisamente te quería preguntar sobre esos.
I wanted to ask you about those projects as the studio, Entangled Others, not all of them, because I know that you collaborate in many, but maybe if you can mention some that can give us more context to know your work a little bit, and what has led you to this collaboration with the Museum of Altamira. I want to mention that this year during the festival we've established a very interesting collaboration with national museums through the Ministry of Culture with emerging artists. We have been able to collaborate with them. They're experimenting with different arts, formulas, bidimensional photography, for instance, that have to do with technology and different tools to be able to create site-specific projects that would have established a dialogue with the collection of that museum. In the case of Altamira, it was interesting to see to converge artists that are so cutting edge as Sophia and Feileacan, that focus on visualization, artistic generation, and to compare this or converge it towards some of the first manifestations of visual art that we have in our country that can be seen in the original cave. And this has led to this collaboration. I just wanted to mention this and ask you about these previous projects that have led to this project.
I'm happy to share a little bit more context for the project, what has led up to the project. So, as you can see here, this is us diving, and that is fun, but there is a good reason for us doing that, and it's because a lot of our work revolves around how do we collect data about the natural world, because we're very interested in exploring how can we use these technologies to help us connect, to create new connections, emotional and experiential, with the natural world. So part of that is precisely here, to go diving, to use scientific buoys to collect everything from images to sound to three-dimensional data, etc. And of course, we also collaborate with scientific institutions. For example, here is data from one of the climate simulations around ocean turbulence and eddies, the currents, from the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, whom we've been collaborating with one of their oceanographers, Joan Jort. And this is an example of using simulations as part of the data we would need in order to work within our practice. And of course, it's not just about going out and collecting, but here, for example, is a process image from a collaboration between Sophia and the artist Anna Riddler, wherein not only did they go out and collect specimens of the natural world, but they also created their own developing fluids to create their own photographic papers in order to not just collect specimens, but how they were then transferred into image through these contact prints, these sort of very old forms of, or at least nowadays with modern digital photography being ubiquitous, how these, more analog methods are also a means of structuring and interpreting data even before we bring them into a digital form or start working with them artistically. So there are many different ways of collecting data, which we would then use to explore artistically the results of training algorithms upon that data. But what do you do when you don't have data? So, as you can imagine, the dodo, there's a limit to how much more we can learn about the dodo, I'm afraid. And also, a lot of the representations of the dodo are perhaps somewhat questionable as to their actual accuracy. Although, right now, most of what we know about them to be true is that apparently they were delicious, which was a problem. However, so what do we do when we have so little data? And especially when you look at social media, what you see primarily is, if you look for critically endangered species, you'll see large mammals, be they pandas, lions, tigers, all kinds of whales, all these large mammals The reality is, though, that's just a small fraction, but the majority of the species that we know to be critically endangered, now close to 9,000 species so far, have been assessed and evaluated as critically endangered. Most of their representations look a lot closer to this, and frankly, I don't know what that is, and it's very hard for me to understand what is this creature, what does it look like, what is it, why is it important, what ecosystem is it part of? How do we even sort of like try and expand our notion of, conserving the natural world beyond the big four-legged mammals that look cute when they're small? So what we did was we thought, okay, we can take the tree of life, which, is now encompasses about, depending on who you ask, some 1.3 million species have been catalogued, and we estimate that there might be as many as 8 million species out there. However, we have this big sprawling tree of life ranging from the bacterial to animals, reptiles, etc., fungi. But what about the data that we have available? So for this, we found the largest open, permissively licensed data set that we could find, which only contains some 10,000 species across some 2.7 million images. That sounds like a lot of data, but remember, just the critically endangered species we know of already is close to 9,000 species. So there's clearly not a lot of data. So if we were to fast forwards 50 years and all these species have gone extinct, how would we know what they'd look like? I mean, if we consider that maybe an archive of, such as this data set here might be preserved by scientists for the future, so we have some data, right? Can we use these algorithms to try and recreate what these specimens looked like? So what we did was, we took a critically endangered species represented by the red dot there, and then we created a second tree of life where we placed those 10,000 species and we tried to find the nearest relative within that tree that we had data of. And that way we used their nearest relative, so to speak, to create a form of reconstruction, if you will, a sort of speculative reconstruction. And for this project, Critically Extant, here's one example of what that looked like. Now, actually, that was one of the best ones we got out of the system. We did a lot of runs of this. And this is the peacock tarantula. It's endemic to India. I'm sorry if you're afraid of spiders, but it is actually really quite beautiful and special, and also still critically endangered. So this was a good result, right? This actually looks quite similar to what we were after here. But it very quickly started to go downhill. And it turns out that, it doesn't take very long before the mangrove finch and what we were able to reconstruct from its nearest relative within the sort of tree of known data, as we were calling it, it's not quite the same, is it? And of course, as we continued, this didn't exactly improve. Sometimes you'd have something that's, at least, for example, bird-like or snake-like or plant-like, but the reality is none of these look at all like any of the species they're supposed to represent. And yeah, this shows us basically that, and there's, of course, at the same time, there's been a lot of hype around these new technologies such as neural networks or so-called AI. The reality is, though, that without data, they just can't actually do more than they have the data to do. And we were, of course, lucky enough to be able to present this project in various contexts to try and explore how can we, create some kind of curiosity here in Times Square as part of Midnight Moments, where in 2022, where we were trying to sort of invoke some kind of curiosity that maybe someone might question, what is this specimen being represented here, to sort of explore how can, even though we cannot actually recreate these creatures, we can't really create good representations of them, but that still doesn't mean that there isn't space to explore how we can use these to incite some kind of curiosity or create some kind of representation of the space that's missing, that through using these tools in artistic practice, we're actually able to, rather than, try and generate something that's very realistic, we can rather trace the boundaries of our knowledge, of our imagination, and where, the boundaries of where those limits are of that.
Eso me trae a la memoria, tenemos...
Now we have a recent piece of news with regard to the recovery of mammoth. through research that will allow us to rebuild its DNA. With science, I'm really interested by this intersection that you're mentioning, taking into account the scientific approach that we can have to projects, data gathering, environment analysis, prospects, the diving images that you were showing us. And then also taking into account that AI, with the weaknesses of this database or the system, can generate something that is closer to imagination or artistic practices. Since the Middle Age, you've showed different images. We have these books with different creatures, bestiaries, recreations of these animals, and there's a long tradition, artistic tradition, with which you can support yourself. Where are you between art and science? Where do you stand?
Good question. I mean, absolutely. I mean, as shown in the beginning with the medieval illustrators and sort of the work we're doing now, it's very much exploring from our standpoints, from our, in a sense, cone of experience, and trying to represent that. And of course, we do not exist in a vacuum, and I think it's also important in the context of talking about these new technologies that also as an artistic practice we do not exist as something new. It's just a continuation of, the work done by many countless artists before us. And take for example Luigi Serafini, an Italian artist who has over 40 years now basically been slowly building up this encyclopedia of a fantastic world, which in some ways you could call almost, it looks in the context of our modern eyes like something you might get out of a neural network, all these original strange combinations of animals, of humans, of all these kind of imagined world that's somehow legible and familiar but at the same time not. And in the context of our practice where, we're both using these tools which allow you to have that kind of image making process where you are working not with the precise image like you would in a scientific context. So we're not working with technologies that allow us to generate pixel-perfect representations of a bird to a bird, right? But rather what you get through these things is the visual essence. You get something that at first glance looks like bird-esque or jellyfish-esque. You can have this visual essence of that, but then when you look close, there is no real bird there. It does not make sense. There is this aspect. And for us, that's been very interesting, especially in collaboration working with scientists a lot. We've been working more and more with art-science collaborations in our practice and exploring how can we work with this purposefully non-scientific form of expression, but in a way that still can touch upon and distill aspects that allow us to create representations that are more accessible, that have that entry point to something that otherwise, might be numerical strings of data or a data set of tens of thousands of microscopic images, which in themselves, are very hard to pass. How can we create a kind of a bridging point experientially to that?
Y en vuestras colaboraciones con científicos se ha dado.
And in your collaborations with scientists, maybe you found that one of the images generated by your systems, by your AIs, were closer to something that is scientifically possible, or that might have been interesting for scientists from the investigation point of view? Discussion
with scientists as to, if, we could predict specimens that they haven't discovered yet, and this has been the topic of a collaboration we have ongoing with a couple of scientists who are working with praying mantises in the Amazonian rainforest. And there we are exploring, can we somehow take all the data they've collected and try and predict what might be there, that they have some reference of what they might be looking for. Because you have to understand, praying mantis, these tiny insects, they range from this size to this size, and they're very well camouflaged. So trying to understand and trying to predict what might look like a random piece of branch or leaf or ground could actually be a crazy new species when unfolded. So we've been working, exploring this aspect. The reality is these tools are very limited, and part of our practice is to show also that these tools are not magic. Like, just because it's called artificial intelligence, does not mean it's conscious or that there is any kind of rational thinking mind involved. But secondly, also, they do have very much limits, as we've critically extant here. we could not generate anything that wasn't, within the training data set. We could still create novel combinations, and push it and try to represent. But ultimately, part of the practice is also showing those limits. And in the context of a scientific collaboration, it's been very interesting to explore when can we communicate the distilled essence of, for example, a scientific study or data collected from scientific explorations, and when can we rather try and trace the limits of that knowledge or the missing gaps, somehow create representations of what's missing as a way of inviting into further interactions and discussions.
Y esta práctica está de alguna manera relacionada también.
Is this related to a certain awareness with regard to the environmental challenges, conflicts in the future with regard to our cohabitation as species? Is this taken into account in your matrix, or is it related to context? Can you maybe reach conclusions by watching the work?
Focused on the natural world and how we can connect and interact with that. I mean, a lot of these technologies in themselves are problematic if we look at scales. So for us, it's been very interesting to explore that we have, this world where we're faced with climate crisis, with climate change, and the reality is, because we are dealing with human nature in the context of all these conflicts, what we found is these technologies really just act as, far more high-definition mirrors to our world. What you see online, for example, with all these products that have emerged, like Midjourney and so forth, these are trained upon, masses of available data to us, which in itself there are a lot of rightfully so ongoing questions around copyright, rights, and usage and so forth. But what they also represent is a mirror image or a distilled version of that common space. And what we see there is, for example, representation of animal life is very poor, of ecology in general is very sort of this picturesque idea of nature that's emerged from Instagram, for example, and this idea of the perfect curated sort of world where nature is some kind of place we go on holiday or explore or have as kind of an entertainment. So these pervasive kind of attitudes become encoded in these products that then are used, to sort of produce imagery at large scale. And at the same time, the world is, of course, not sitting still, and in the context of climate crisis, in the context of these accelerated uses of technology, which in turn require ever more actual hardware, which involves going out and digging up masses of the earth and doing deep sea mining, which is absolutely terrible to do. Very, very disruptive to a lot of marine ecology that we depend upon for about 60% of the oxygen we breathe. So there is a lot of these aspects here in this technology, but at the same time, if we don't try and use these technologies to show examples of how we can create feedback loops with these tools that somehow nudge us into a different way of thinking, I think that's been for us in dealing with the context of not only problematic aspects of the technologies, but also problematic aspects of society, of especially when you cannot have ecology without a climate crisis these days. So to explore how can we see in our practice other ways, and this is of course the experimental part of our practice, is how can we explore and see other ways of creating examples of how these technologies could be used to nudge us in different ways, to kind of have that experimental aspect.
Es muy interesante eso que comentas de cómo hasta qué punto.
It is very interesting to hear you say that the creation of nature depends on the environment, and how this landscape vision that is both very ideal and artistic, it is being reproduced all the time on social media, Instagram, etc. It is possibly, we have a lot to explore with regard to reality, the real representation of nature, something that we are all part of. It is organic, it is in movement, and in this regard, I think that your project sheds light on this, and it is also very aesthetic. In certain digital artists that work with different tools, but at the beginnings of the internet, for instance, these forms of art have been associated to conceptual art, And maybe the message was more important than the final appearance of the work. And one of the things that draws my attention from your project is the aesthetics, this capacity to attract these albums of illustrations. There's a clear connection with the wonderful representation of nature, right?
I think there is a sort of the aesthetics, of course, and the presentation of things, I think is very interesting. I mean, because we cannot help but be aesthetic. I mean, to be human is to have some kind of relationship to aesthetics, be they visual or audible or tactile, but we are shaped through that. And I think what we've seen, you know, with this sort of proliferation, with this recent wave where digital art has come to the forefront a bit more than it previously has, is we've seen that, you know, this process of, you know, aesthetic exploration becomes, you know, very much accelerated. But for example, when we were asked to test an early version of Dali, one thing that Sophia immediately found was that if you try to generate the word, use the word peacock, it would only generate a male peacock. There was no representation of the female peacock within that. So that this is a sort of interesting tension, and at the same time, of course, working as artists, you know, and sort of in reference to conceptual art, there's also this notion of upon what foundations are the aesthetics built. And of course, you know, we can use any model out there, but if you want to actually represent it, to create a process, you know, it's this performative aspect of going out there, of collecting data of the natural world, of encoding that through the process of training into a model, which then can produce representations of that, where it becomes something which, on the surface of it, is an aesthetic experience. And of course, as artists, we want to not to require a sort of literature to reach. I mean, this is the interesting conflict we've had, or not conflict, but tension when working with scientists who are 100% about context, you know, where everything has, you know, deep references and chains of papers in order to understand a very small phenomena. But of course, the reality is people can't always read everything all the time. So one of our challenges has been how to encode a concept into some kind of aesthetic experience that, if relevant or interesting, can unfold to contain all these deeper layers.
Bueno, pues si te parece oportuno, vamos a adentrarnos en el proyecto.
Well, I think it would be good to have a look at the project that you've prepared for Altamira, focusing on that. The first question has to do with the title and how the project is born.
So the title Perpetual Present came from... This whole project is in a sense a continuation of some of those questions that arose with Critically Extant, the project I just showed you. And the thing is that we are, you know, forever living in the present, and these cave paintings from Altamira, which I believe are some 30,000 years old, while they are still present, and of course of great fascination to us, it's incredibly fascinating to go see them, but the reality is we do not know who made them, we do not know their social context, all of that, so we can only hope to explore and to understand them in a context of our modern experience. And here you can see Sophia visiting the replica of the caves, as the actual access to the real cave itself is very limited, but they've created this fantastic replica of the cave and the cave paintings. And one of the things is, of course, you know, it's the fascinating experience of experiencing something that has been present for thousands and thousands of years, you know, so much older than you yourself are, so, you know, potentially 1,000 times older, and at the same time is still present and legible there in some way, but entirely cryptic. But through the use of modern technologies, we've been able to use various kinds of image processing and so on, and we started to tease apart, you know, the missing pieces of the puzzle, things that weren't visible to the naked eye, and at the same time slowly teased apart what are these representations of. And one of the fascinating things about this is that a lot of or not all of them, but some of the specimens that are shown are extinct now. These are bison, for example, that are actually already extinct and that no longer exist, but that were depicted then, that were part of their daily life then. And this got us thinking a lot about, one thing is, you know, this question of what is disappearing, and we don't know what's disappearing from around us these days. We cannot catalogue which species are critically extinct or going extinct fast enough to keep track of the actual process of that. So we are on this sort of trajectory from critically endangered all the way over to extinct on so many species that we cannot see or touch. And for this project, we thought there's this fascinating thing that while we do not quite understand how these cave paintings worked in societal context, were they somewhere where they taught, about which animals were important for living? Were they were they entertainment? Were they the cinema? We can only guess at what their role was. But now, here in the present, they are also, at least on some level, a memorial of what was that we no longer can experience. And so we wanted to explore that tension through trying to, in a sense, do a reenactment of this process of painting on a cave wall, where we wanted to encode those species that we know of that are critically endangered in a similar manner, using paint onto a surface. And basically, we decided what we first needed to do was to actually we needed to have a cave wall. Now, what I'm showing you is very much an in-progress part of the work, so you will only see some parts of this. What we're working on for example, on the aspect of neural networks is still under training and will be for several more weeks before the final production comes together. But what we started with was to work with modeling and figure out a rough way of generating a cave surface and then printing these as clay tiles, which would then be, fired and, assembled on a wall in order to create, in a sense, fragments of our cave. And one of the fascinating things is how they applied paint to this. And this is one of the reasons, for example, that we're exploring using paints and not ceramic glazings, is because they were using paint, and at the time, I don't think they had any notion that their paintings would last for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, but rather they used surprisingly advanced technologies to spray and apply paints to the wall, to mark, to scratch, to etch. And so a lot of this work is now also about exploring how do we, when we use these neural networks that attempt to represent these critically endangered species, how can we transform them into the surface. So here you see some very early tests where we are working with how do we actually recreate that process of spraying paint onto a surface, of painting with a paintbrush, making these marks, and in general trying to reenact that, not in a sense of trying to create an exact copy of what was. The goal isn't here to mimic what has been, but rather to explore through the lens of these technologies, of these aesthetics that emerged when we try to regenerate using this technological lensing, this kind of new experience of that. And here you can see some more painting tests. This is a very literal bison there, just for the sake of testing, but that's not at all what it will look like in the end. However, we did think it was rather amusing to share with you. And it's also this fascinating thing of, very often in image making, we think of the surface as flat. So, if you're on a screen, you're working with an image that is flat, right? And very often we think of printmaking or painting as on flat surface, but of course the caves were three-dimensional, and a part of the work we're working with right now is how do we take advantage of painting on a surface so that depending on your angle, the work shifts. And what is the reality of being in those cases, if you walk there with a burning torch, the way the flames flicker animate these images that you see, the legs will appear to move or jump. And part of our challenge is now exploring how do we encode that in a digital sense to try and explore, can we recreate some of also those experiences from the cave.
Ya como, bueno, una pregunta también para terminar.
A question to finish this section, then we will ask questions for Fili, but I wanted to ask you about this trend according to which you focused on the need, even if the raw material of your work is artificial intelligence that is trained to be able to create new ways of life inspired on these endangered species. In the case of Altamira, you've chosen data sets from species of that area, right? Close to Altamira. So we have this raw material, the technology that has been used, that has to be trained, and time is essential for this. We are discovering this. We're understanding the timing of a project such as this. And also I wanted to ask you about taking this to a tri-dimensional space, making it tangible, using AI in a tangible way. For many of us it is difficult to understand what type of entity can it be. We consider it sort of robot awareness or consciousness, but it also works with technology. But I would like to understand how important it is to take it to the physical space or physical forms that have to do with displays that come from the past, such as the representation, for instance, of the cave that you were mentioning.
Working both with modern technologies but also these ancient ways of working is to understand that we as humans haven't really changed. We still, image making is something that, pre-Stone Age peoples made. The mark making we see on the caves here, and even before that, scrapings and etchings on bones that have been found. This is a very human thing to do, is to create representations that are shared. So when we work with image making, even no matter our intentions, no matter what drives us to make an image, if it's to make a painting or to take a photograph of a loved one, we make images generally because they are then shared with others. And this fascinating thing about working with these older techniques, be they, for example, here trying to reenact the caving or the cave paintings, the way they were produced, or for example in Sophia's solo practice where she works a lot with cyanotypes, is this old proto-photographic technique, is that these are techniques wherein to create them creates not only, just creates the image of the representation, but the medium itself shapes the image. And to understand that it's not just about the image itself, but the way we translate that image into something viewable, be that to show it on a digital display or to show it as a physical object, that process is not neutral, and it's part of the process of communication. It's really fascinating to us that, if you take a cyanotype, for example, you create a negative image, or some kind of object or what have you that blocks the light, and you place that on this photosensitive surface and you place it out in the sun, and the sunlight will expose the areas that are exposed to the sun and the rest will remain unexposed. So when you wash it through, the areas that weren't exposed wash away and you get this beautiful monochrome images. But this happens through interacting with the elements. You take light, you take this, and this forms what's possible with that image. That image can only be what's occludes, for example, while when working with a digital display you can work with three-dimensional experiences through hologram-like structures and so forth. But again, it's always, image making is shaped by how we then share it. For example, it's once we take the images in our minds and try and bring them into the world, this aspect of sharing does not exist as a platonic thing. It's a very real physical thing with the world. And I think it's very important in the context of digital image making nowadays that we do not neglect the fact that even though we see it on a digital display, just that in itself is a way where the medium, the resolution of the display, the quality, the colors, etc., all of these capabilities of that shape our experience. And therefore it's been very important for us to explore these different ancient ways of working with image making, because they can both help us better understand but also expand what we consider a digital image today, because very often our notion of the digital exists in this idea of a platonic realm that exists within this perfect interface of my iPhone, right? Everything is so platonically, neutrally created as interfaces into the digital. The camera app has the perfect icons, and the images we take, are processed with neural networks or computational photography in order to get the best possible image out of an image sensor, which is smaller than a fingernail. All these things, and I think it's very important that we not let the digital image only exist as what you can see on a screen, but that through interacting with the world we can remind ourselves of just the rich tradition of that, and also that everything digital now is not something new and separate from the world. It's an integral part of the traditions that were and always have been part of being human, and that we are a lot better, I think, equipped to explore and to be critical of these new technologies when we understand that and experience them as part of what has been, that this, you know, is a tradition that we have the right to participate in, both as artists but also as those who, you know, view the spectators who come to see arts, that they are not somehow disqualified from the discourse of being critical of these technologies because they do not understand them. That is a very sort of problematic stance we've seen, where often the narrative is shaped by only those who actually understand the technology that goes into this. And I think that is also very important, that when you then have representations which are so physical, that they are, you know, creating more help ease that access to all.
Claro.
Sorry for the rant there.
No. Bueno, yo te agradezco mucho abierto una pequeña ventana.
Thank you very much for opening this window towards your creation and sharing it with our public. We will open a Q&A afterwards. The circle is closed because in a certain way we're also talking about the representation of imagination, and I was thinking maybe these representations in the cave, realistic or symbolic, we consider that they cannot be surrealistic as your representations. We consider that, for instance, scientific evidence with photography, with technology, with proto-painting in the case of the cave, we consider that this person who painted this thousands of years ago could maybe also have an imaginative or symbolic aim, and this is some things that you're seeing with your result, these animals that are being created with this robotic arm that are similar to the natural world. They have the same appearance that is recognized, but they don't really belong to the natural world. So maybe in the future what you're creating will end up in an archaeological site, and maybe a future artist will consider this to be data. So thank you very much, Fili. I'll invite you to take a seat so that we can now move on to the presentation of our next guests. Allow me to introduce them. First of all, Hausmann and Jorge Salgado, if you want to take a seat, and then I'll give you the floor. I will talk about both of you. Thank you for being here with us today. Hausmann has a degree in fine arts by the University Complutense of Madrid. She's a visual artist. She's a professional photographer. She also works in image editing. She is a teacher in many schools. She's collaborated with the project L'Homme Noyé, based on first historical photography, and by recovering this with AI, she has presented different versions of the L'Homme Noyé. She's also received many awards, Basquedot Festival, for instance, and Bafest. Jorge is a collaborator of hers. You work together on many AI projects since 1992. He works as a professional photographer and also as a teacher. He's been a colleague as teachers at the FT school for many years, but he has taught to 20,000 students. He more or less did the calculation, and this is the amazing figure. So I think that a large part of Spanish photography, at least those that are 5 years younger than you, have been your students. So Photoespaña owes you a lot. Thank you for being here. It is great to have you here. You're here also due to digital technique, photography technique, your use of these tools, of this incredible tool which is AI, and you also have recent work with Thyssen, an adaptation of certain classical paintings based on projects that have to do with mental health. You can check the Thyssen website. I don't want to anticipate your presentations. I don't want to give more details. This is going to be a big surprise. And then if we have time, we will move on to the Q&A. Thank you.
¿Te vas, Papi? Pero pásalo desde el ordenador. Vale. Pásalo desde el ordenador. Sí, Vale. Bueno, pues buenas tardes a todos.
So, good evening, everybody. I'm Professor Jorge Salgado. She's the Dr. Mercedes Hausmann in the scientific world. She's known as Dr. House. And we're going to speak about a project that we've been working on for a little bit more than 3 years. It's a project that is called Per Tempus. It's a scientific project. And, well, I'll give you some context for you to know where this project comes from. I'm going to read it because I don't know the text by heart, because it's a little bit long. So let's move to the next. Yeah, that's it. So let me set a background. The 2nd of May 1972, an Italian newspaper published an unusual piece of news. A group of scientists, among which we had the physicist Francesco Falucci and aerospace engineer Heinrich von Wesselbaum, directed by the Benedictine monk Marcello Bellini, said that they had invented a machine that was called Speculum, able to get photographic images from the past. Here we can see the publication in the newspaper that appeared in 1972. These are images from Marcello Bellini, Francesco Falucci, and von Wesselbaum. So I keep on reading. In spring 2021, we received, through a very well-known historian that was bonded to the Vatican archives, some documents that reveal the existence of a prodigious machine able to register photographically any moment in history. Despite we didn't believe it, we decided to embark in a research with the goal of proving the accuracy of that astonishing discovery. In one of our many travels to Rome, we had the chance of getting in touch with top manager of the Vatican Library, a Spanish conservationist, that gave us a very important hint. This would take us to see who could offer information in a more specific way about Speculum, the name that this great machine had. After 3 months of dinners and a few bottles, true to be said, we were confident we were able to get the information that we had been looking for. Svalbard, an Arctic archipelago in the end of the inhabited world, 4,000 kilometers away, was the name of the island where we would find an old nuclear shelter that was left over since the Cold War there, and that untamed place we would find our Grail. So on the next image we show where the island is, where the Svalbard is. See, that's the north of Norway, that's Iceland. It is in the polar circle. So theoretically, there we had our Holy Grail there. So the island is inhabited just in the center, the capital Svalbard, capital city. There are many more polar bears than inhabitants. The north of the island is not inhabited. So according to what they had told us, there was a gulf, and at that gulf, in that zone, we would find the leftover bunker from the Cold War. So we went there. It was 9 of us, the people that were able to travel. We started our research. We followed the coordinates that they had given us. The station's called Tisreisa. There we found out that Tisreisa in Norwegian finds future traveler, or traveler from the future. So we eventually found the access to the Tisreisa station. There was no indication, there was nothing, no one. We were able to find it. We got inside. Now, this was the entry door. It was just closed with a locker that was quite rusty, that we were able to open it without any kind of issue. We were able to get in there, and we found an empty place, untamed place with preservation rooms. And in one of the alleys, we found this door that looked like a safe. We thought that maybe something important was inside. We were able to open it, and we got into what we found that was the speculum chamber. This was part of the room. We found it like this. And this is the first contact with the machine. We found the machine. Among many other things, we were able to connect it to our battery system, and at least we were able to plug it in. We were there for 1 month and 10 days working with the different devices. We move on to the next one. This was the first positive test. As soon as we were able to get an image, well, there's an image, as you can see, we don't have to say anything. We don't have to say anything about the image. You know what it is about. And we were able to get images as impressive as this one in test number 9, a Roman Empire when the Colosseum was being built. We saw how it was built. Test 21C was the discovery of Khephren and Mykerinos pyramids when they were discovered. And as you can see there, I'm going to read it here. After 4 weeks and after sending the first images to Spain, we were able to guarantee the support from an important private sponsor that would fund the transport of the team and the research for the 2 following years. What you'll see in a minute is just a small sample of how powerful this device is. After its update, we call it as iSpeculum. No one can imagine the consequences that it could have. Let's watch some of the images that we took. This is the device when it got to Madrid. They cleaned it, they fine-tuned it, and it was the original speculum to the Madrid lab. This was the main part of the machine. So in the lab, they created the first prototype of iSpeculum that was digital, okay? We had a digital device that was much more updated. It will allow us to take many more pictures, and I will see some pictures that have been taken here. This is a selection of the first images that have been obtained by iSpeculum. This is in Madrid, okay, where we took these pictures. Now you'll see the images. So this is an image from the year 2593 before Christ. This is the building of pyramids. So Jerusalem on the 30th, in the year 30 after Christ, among the many images that we got this one. So you can think whatever you want. So the next one is much more explicit. In the year 33 after Christ, we got this image. So after many attempts and many images, we got this image. We move on. This is the Kingdom of Castile in year 1497 after Christ. We guess that this is Queen Elizabeth. It's quite sad. Let's move on. So San Salvador is currently Bahamas, the 12th of October 1492. Out of the many images that we got, and we thought that maybe this could be Christopher Columbus. We're almost sure that that's him. And well, for us, this image is quite special. For the ones of you that know the history of photography, first picture that is preserved is from Isidore de Nipse. It's a picture that is called Sight from the Window in Le Grasse. So we were able to take this image from Isidore de Nipse, taking the first picture of history, and we were able to get that specific moment of that image. Well, this is a presentation of our research and what we're doing. And now what we're going to do is just live, okay? This is the first time that iSpeculum gets out of the lab, the first time ever. What Ma has in her hands, although it's a regular computer, is just a console that is connected directly with the lab, with our lab. And we will try live to get historical images through this. So one important thing. The iSpeculum works with quite complex codes, and what we've tried is to work with it from a very much more common app and to translate the numerical codes into words. So we will put words and it will translate it. You will see that it tries to get images. Sometimes they will be more accurate or less, but via different tests we are able to get these images. So we have different images that have been prepared with different topics that we'll look for, and we'll leave a couple of images or three, and I will ask you about what the moment of history that we want to visit, and we'll try to get images from that time of history. So I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Mayer so that she can start the process.
Lo que vamos a hacer ahora.
Well, now we are going to take a journey through different historical moments, situations. We would have loved to have a camera for those events, those moments where humans didn't exist yet. And with this discovery, we've been able to photography all of that wasn't photographed, human situations and pre-human situations. So I'm going to select the information, and I will let the technology surprise us and allow us to visualize whatever she wants to show us, I speculum. So we will just introduce some words. The software will be translating this to the software and will show us the images from those days. Just give me a second.
Como digo, es complicado, ¿eh?
As I've said, it's difficult because it's the first time that we do it without a code, because our experts in the lab are working with the code.
Vale. Vale. Ya está enviada la orden.
So we've already sent the command. So it says, a real dinosaur eating grass in the middle of a forest. We want it to be realistic. We've entered the aesthetics of the image, Hasselblad camera. We always want to have the same aesthetic so that the images are quite similar. Okay. You want it to be with daylight and a few more code information, some additional code information. So I think that we have the image there. See, these are the images from these dinosaurs that we had in that moment. See how impressive they are. So what's the selection criteria is ours directly. I like the first one with that blurry background. I think that is much more interesting. See the picture that our eye speculum has obtained. Okay, so we can move to the next one.
Vamos a ir evolucionando.
We'll keep on evolving, okay?
Es antes de esa.
Ah, sí, perdón.
Vale. Volvemos, como es evidentemente.
So, for us and for our society, it is an important moment. The fact of knowing in Jesus Christ's time what happened. So, yeah, before that, we have to see how the human species appears. So let's see what the first men look like. We want a picture of a human being with dark skin, and during the Neolithic period. We want the camera aesthetic to be the same, and let's see what it gives us. You see that it's not detailing the percentage of image that it's getting. Well, in fact, you can see it there. These are the images. These are the Neolithic man images.
E incluso
We can even zoom out to be able to have more information, right? In some of the images.
The first and the fourth one.
First one?
Primero la cuarta.
Yeah, maybe the first and the fourth one are interesting, right?
alejarla y mientras vamos preparando.
Okay, so we're going to zoom out.
Claro, ahí el especulum.
So in this case, the eye speculum has focused too much on the camera, so we said that it had to be very close, so let's zoom it out to see what we had.
Luego también a los sucesos que puedan.
We're also dealing with events that can occur as we take the picture. We're traveling in time, we're taking the picture, so some of the events, cannot be forecasted and they can be erroneous.
Estamos sacando una foto.
We are taking a picture of hundreds of thousands of years ago. So maybe during this time travel, these images, maybe they're impaired, we can lose different nuances, but see, if we have more information about his environment, we can see the jungle, and the tool is amazing. Possibility of time traveling to see what this time of history looked like. And now we will move to the next image. Let's try to go to Jesus Christ time. So let's go to Jerusalem, and we'll try to capture a dinner by a group of people. So let's try if we're able to see the accurate moment of the Last Supper. So let's see what image we can get.
Dun, dun, dun.
Todo tiene su proceso.
Sí.
It takes time a little bit.
Nosotros cuando estamos trabajando con ellos,
when we work with this, we have to insert descriptive and visual information, and also anything that has to do with the technology that we use to be able to capture this image.
Como veis ahí.
Yep, as you can see there, we can tell what kind of lens we wanted to use, the diaphragm, the kind of light, etc., and so on and so forth. So we still don't know the technology that was able to manufacture this device, but we see the different options that it gives us that are incredible.
tened en cuenta que estamos siempre disparando con la misma cámara.
We're always shooting with the same camera, so the results have to be similar in terms of aesthetics. This is one of our aims.
Sé que estáis impresionados ahora mismo.
I know you're impressed. I can see your faces.
Vamos a hacer un salto en el tiempo.
Okay, we're gonna take another leap in time. Let's go to...
Después de Cristo.
Let's go to the 5th century after Christ, and let's see if we're able to see how the Chinese wall was built. Although the Chinese wall was built from the 1st century before Christ until the 15th or 16th century. So let's see if we can find an important moment of that building. Of course, we need to go to a radically different place, to the 5th century China. So sometimes we have to discard information, and we need to find other ways to give commands to the device.
In this case, what can we see, Jorge?
Gente trabajando, la verdad.
We see people working.
Yo creo que en algún momento se ha confundido de.
I think that maybe it had made a mistake with the place. These things happen.
Lanzando un...
Yes, we're just tossing a coin, right? So maybe we have to insert the information in a more specific way.
Vale.
Marcado. Vale. Vamos a intentar meterle la información de otra manera.
So let's try to enter the information in a different way.
Otra cosa diferente. Dame un segundito.
Sí, vamos a intentar cambiarlo.
So let's try to change it.
Que se ha equivocado.
We are telling it that it has made a mistake. We are asking it to change the location, so that system is quite sensitive.
Momento.
Maybe we have discovered a monument that no longer exists. Who knows what these people are building?
Tenemos algunos descartes también que
We also have some discarded images that we won't be able to show. I think we're running out of time.
¿Dónde está?
Now it knows where it is. Now it has found it.
Sí.
With a small modification, I think. Let's see.
Sí, ahí está. Sí.
aquí hay un elemento bastante interesante.
There's an interesting element here. I think that our device has taken certain decisions. The speculum itself has to be in the image, and so that's why you can see it. But we can see the building in progress. And let's move on to the next one.
Que no lo hemos comentado.
And we didn't mention that we have the capacity of generating infinite images by using many resources, of course. But we, of course, need to save and take certain decisions on the way. We're going to try to obtain images of a very important character, Olite Bush. I don't know if you know this character. One of the first feminists. She wrote an in-depth manifesto in 18th century. We have very few images from her, just a few paintings, so let's try and have a look at what she looked like.
So let's see if we can make it. I'm sure it will. She was
María Antonieta.
She lived during Marie Antoinette's time, but she had a different fate, but for a noble cause, let's say.
Exacto. Bueno, y pensando, nos gustaría que fuerais pensando en alguna.
We'd like you to think about a specific event or scene that you would like to see in images. We're gonna ask you for your feedback on this one. So start thinking, then we will see if the device collaborates or not. We've tried it out to make sure that we were going to have good results, but there's also this uncertainty in the whole process. We're also going to make another leap in geographical terms.
Ir a España, concretamente.
Now we'll move to Spain. Specifically, we'll go to Madrid on the 2nd of May, 1808. There was a moment when we expelled the French from our country that had invaded us. And we'll see what it looked like. So we've obtained... Yeah, there it is. Now we know what she looked like.
Revisar un poco ciertas partes de la imagen.
We might have to review certain parts of the image, but this is an approximate image. We're capturing the moment in which she's writing one of her famous manifestos, and I think I like the second one. That one I think is the best for the time being, and we can save it.
Tenemos la capacidad además de ampliarla.
We can also zoom in quite a lot to approximately 2,000 pixels, which is good, and to see certain details that we haven't been able to access up to now.
Yeah, for now we have not been able to increase the resolution, but we're working on it. I'm sure that we'll make it quite soon. In fact, in some images we can have more than 4,000 per 4,000 pixels, but not in all of them, just in a few of them. So let's go with the 2nd of May. It's almost there.
Vamos a intentar generar dos imágenes.
We're going to try to generate two images from a specific event. It all is always very interesting and quite recent in our history. May the 2nd, yes? Do we have it?
Pues sí, sí.
Yep. There you have the images of the 2nd of May in Madrid, what it looked like. That's when the French army left. It's a matter of joy for all of us.
¿Algún familiar?
Can you see any relatives in the picture?
Bueno, y vamos con la... Hemos mandado la del...
Sí, ahora queremos generar una imagen.
Now we want to generate an image. Personally, well, we participated in the selection of events. And even if now we're being very diverse, one of the events that has always drawn my attention, there was an exhibition recently, a few years ago, on Titanic. And it is very sad to, well, not have any images from the sinking of Titanic in 1912. Obviously, nothing was left behind. So it would be great to be able to have these images to capture this moment. We have different angles.
Chimeneas.
On one of it, it had lost one of the chimneys. There was another chimney and an additional one. But we see how it sunk.
Nos apetecía también enseñaros.
We also wanted to show you this attempt. We wanted to reproduce an intimate part or aspect of this event, taking into account the tragedy, maybe to be able to see those that were in the water waiting to be rescued by the smaller boats. We have paintings, recreations of the sinking of the ship, but not of those people who were in the water. Those were the main lead protagonists of this this story, of course.
Si alguno es sensible, que cierre.
If there's, you can find very harsh images. If you are too sensitive, close your eyes. There are many historical events that we've skipped. Some of the images that we got in the lab were too harsh, and we can't show them.
Tenemos algún bonus por aquí.
We also have bonus, but it would be great to hear from you. What would you like to see after we look at this image? Eye speculum can also move in space, time, and can also take us to other kinds of shipwrecks. For instance, if we're looking for Asian people, there can be a change related to this.
Eye speculum has to understand our language in words in order to translate it into its code, and there are glitches there.
It is under development. We have quite a few correct images, but we still have to research more. We only have men drowning in the water. No, well, women were in the little boats, right? And so it's logical.
¿Tenemos un micrófono?
Well, do you have a mic? Can anybody think of a moment in history that would be interesting to send to Eye Speculum here? The resurrection. Whose resurrection? There are many resurrections.
¿Sabe de quién?
Es que, a ver.
Who are we talking about?
We can do it, but we've already seen Jesus Christ. So it's an important moment for us. So any further ideas? So yeah, let's do that. We can upload it.
Muerte de Hitler en el búnker.
The death of Hitler in the bunker.
El speculum es posible.
Okay, so the eye speculum might censor certain characters and situations. Eye speculum is not ready to show certain situations and characters. The death of Hitler, no, not resurrection, no, we're mixing. No, Hitler didn't resurrect, right?
Hablando del fallecimiento, ¿no?
We're talking about his death, the death of Hitler.
Ya os digo que es posible.
De hecho, en cuanto se le pone alguna palabra.
In fact, when you enter a word that is not well understood, it's banned. And Hitler is sometimes not understood.
¿Estaba ubicado?
Where was the bunker? Do you know? Do you know where the bunker was located? More specific information? Do we have?
So come on, some more ideas. So, for example, the 5th of May, when the French army was expelled from Mexico. Okay.
Muy bien.
Los expulsores de los franceses de México.
Pues ahí está resucitando.
So there we see someone resurrecting.
Bueno, el concepto de resurrección también.
The concept of resurrection is quite abstract. We have to take this into account.
No one has real images of resurrection. Nobody knows what it looks like.
Claro.
It maybe cannot be visualized. It might be like that, right?
¿Quién sabe, no?
Sí.
Who knows?
La expulsión, ¿me habías dicho?
French being expelled on May the 5th. Which year? 1862 from Mexico. I'm sorry, yes, I thought it was, yeah. There we go.
Esto es muy general, con lo cual.
This is too generic, so we might have different results. Here we can see a bunker. We have to take into account that iSpeculum uses cinema references and just uses anything that is part of our visual culture. So some of these images, you have them here. Just briefly before.
He wasn't there anymore, he was in his room.
O en la siguiente, si pedimos alguna más.
For the next one, if we have another request, we can try at some point, maybe. One more. Okay, let's try one more. Who wants to make a proposal?
Un momento de interacción de Cristóbal.
Maybe Christopher Columbus interacting with the first indigenous people they saw? Okay.
Mirar ahí cómo expulsaron a los franceses.
See how the French army was expelled in Mexico. Oh, what a thing.
Son imágenes como muy abstractas.
These images are very abstract. Maybe we should select some parts of the images. Well, it was difficult to see because it was by night. All the prompts given to the device take some time.
It's true that we have to request until we get the image that we want, as you can see here. So these are the first images that it gives. So we have to fine-tune it and we have to keep on working.
I have a question. Indigenous in English. Indigenous. Okay.
A ver, esta es la última que vamos a crear.
This is the last one we're going to create.
No nos da tiempo de hacer más.
We're running out of time. We don't have time for more.
Nos encantaría compartirlo.
But we'd love to be able to share more.
Sí, exacto. Y como veis, pues una de las cosas.
As you can see, we don't have time, but something that is very helpful is sending reference images to be able to set the context, and this is quite important with regard to what we're trying to do.
No lo tiene muy claro todavía, ¿eh?
I think it's not very clear yet.
Puedo concretar un poquito más.
We're trying to be more specific here, but we would have to specify the time, the date, and we would get something better. We don't have time for more.
So just one last picture. then maybe it's here. So.
Ya está.
So all the characters are fictitious, and these images have been created by Jorge Salgado and Hausmann with AI without subsequent post-production.
Ir simplemente para una.
Thank you very much. We've used the time. These tools require time, so I wanted to thank the three of you for being here, for showing your work live. It is not easy to do this experiment, and thank you to all of you for being here at this session. And well, we're running out of time, and Fili has to take a plane, and I think he's a bit worried about it, so thank you very much for being with us today. We will see each other in Santander. We will open on the 13th of September the exhibition by Fili and Sofia. Santander in September is a wonderful place. The climate, the food, excellent. So we're really eager to see this exhibition. Thank you for your work, and thank you for coming to Madrid with this little time. Thank you, Mer and Jorge. Be careful with any foreign powers that might want to use this tool. This might generate into unexpected consequences. So yes, it's complicated to try to find that image of Columbus with an indigenous person. But in any case, we've seen the disclaimer. We've seen what we can achieve with AI and what we can achieve with intelligence. Thank you.
Gracias.